welcome to the Sweet Sparrow Knits podcast. My name is Julie, and you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as Sweet Sparrow Knits, and you can find my hand-dyed yarn on Etsy as Sweet Sparrow Yarns. Thanks so much for joining me today. It has been quite a while since I've posted a podcast episode, and the primary and most obvious reason for that is because we moved. In the end of February, we decided to move out of New York City or the New York City area in my case, and my boyfriend John and I moved out to the countryside, and it is divine. I love it so much. I'm so happy to be in nature more. It's just wonderful. We moved into a historic cottage that used to be a canal keeper's cottage because we live along the Delaware River, and the D&H Canal used to run along right next to it. So we are settling in, and it's absolutely wonderful to be living here. Since it's been a while, and some of you may not have watched the podcast before, I'll just do a little intro. My name is Julie. I am almost 30. I turn 30 next week. And I am a full-time independent yarn dyer, and I also create woven art, mostly on commission at this point. And I love to garden, which is something that I'm able to do now that we've moved, which is so exciting. Of course, I want the garden to look like we've lived here for 15 years, and we've lived here for about 3 months. So not exactly a realistic goal, but we'll get there. We have a vegetable garden and a flower garden, both of which are coming along nicely. We have our first little tomatoes, which you will have seen in the intro, and our zucchinis are flowering, and it's just coming along beautifully, and I can't wait to see how the garden grows as we live here. I hope everyone is staying safe in the current pandemic and staying home as much as possible. If staying home is not an option for you because of your job, I hope that the people around you are working to keep you safe. And I also hope that for those of us who do find ourselves with a lot of spare time right now, because while the pandemic may have taken a lot of things away at the moment, what it has definitely given us is time, which is something a lot of us often lack. So I hope that we are using this time to educate ourselves on the sort of revolution of demanding racial justice that's currently happening in the US and all over the world. It is so important. And for me personally, what I've found very helpful is the writing prompts by Lisa Renee Hall, and you can find these on her Patreon. She is doing a project called Inner Field Trip, which involves writing every day based around a prompt. And she specifically designed this for folks who are highly sensitive or very empathic, as a way to engage with anti-racism efforts in a way that is sustainable, because it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, and we need to make sure that this is something that we can continue for our whole lives. So I would definitely suggest heading over to her Patreon, supporting her, and joining in her Inner Field Trip project as well. And with that, let's get into the knitting. My main project that I've been working on lately is the Grace cardigan by Jane Richmond. It's a fingering weight cardigan that has has a simple lace detail on the yoke on both the front and the back. And I'm knitting this out of yarn by my dear friend Stacy from Stress Knits. She has Stress Knits yarn as well as the Stress Knits podcast. And this is a beautiful custom colorway that she created for me called INFP, after my Myers-Briggs personality type. It's this beautiful soft pink with speckles of blue and violet. It's really lovely. I have about another 3 inches of stockinette, and then it's time for the ribbing. So hopefully I will be finished with this by the next podcast episode, which I'm hoping will be in about 2 weeks. I have also been working on my pinwheel scrap blanket, and this is a pattern by Mina Phillip of Knitting Expat. I have maybe 10 or 12 blocks done at this point. I haven't been working on this a lot since I've been focusing pretty exclusively on the Grace cardigan, but my brother is going to be visiting next week and we'll probably spend quite a bit of time down by the river just enjoying the sunshine. So I will probably put quite a bit of work into this project next week since I don't have to have something hot on my lap to work on it. The next project that I'm going to be casting on is the Little Twigs sweater by Melody of Mandarines. And I have my swatch. I feel very virtuous. I swatched. And this is my yarn. This is Sweet Sparrow Yarns, the Plover base, which is a 50-50 superwash merino and cotton DK weight base. And I'm so thrilled with how it knits up. It's soft and it still has that nice feeling of wool, but with a slightly cooler hand feel, which is great for summer. And I'm really envisioning this sweater as something that I will throw on chilly nights when we're outside watching the fireflies, because we have the most incredible environment for them, and there are just hundreds outside every night. It's really magical. And this will be my first project in an ongoing project, which is going to be to knit all of Melody Hoffman's patterns. I just really love everything she designs, and I just like to have a big goal sometimes, and I also like the amount of structure that will give me, because I often feel overwhelmed and don't want to start a new project because I don't want to choose a new project. And I think having a smaller pool that I can always pull from, and I'm not planning on only knitting her patterns, but it'll be nice to always have that group of patterns if I don't know what else I want to cast on. This is kind of a one-of-a-kind colorway. This was my first try at my Dryad colorway from my new summer 2020 colorway collection. However, Plover does take the color a little bit differently than my bases that have a majority of wool, in that it soaks up the gray dye before it soaks up anything else. So I did need to go ahead and rework the recipe a little bit for this base. So my first try resulted in this more silvery sort of eucalyptus green, which is not what I was going for with Dryad, but I still think it's a beautiful color and I think it will work into my wardrobe beautifully. I do have one finished object to share with you, and it's right here. I finished my granny stripe crochet blanket. I'll put in a picture of how it looks when it's all spread out. It is big enough to fit our queen size bed with some overhang on both sides, so it's enormous. It's a very large blanket, but that's perfect for us because it usually lives on our upstairs couch. Right now I'm in my snug, as I call it. It's our downstairs living room, which is where a lot of my crafting stuff lives. My yarn stash is in here, my sewing machine is over there. So I brought this down to show you. It's really, really big and so soft and so snuggly, and I just love it. Yeah, this is a very special project to me because when I met my boyfriend John, I had already started this. I started this several Christmases ago. So this is definitely an ongoing project for a long time. And when I started it, I just imagined being snuggled up under it with John, and at that point, we definitely did not, we hadn't discussed living together yet, and I just had this thought in the back of my head that that's what I really wanted for this blanket, was for it to be like our snuggly blanket. And now it is. And Bilbo, our kitty, and Reggie, our dog, also absolutely love it. It's very popular with the pets. I will probably do another granny straight blanket at some time because it's so comfy to snuggle up under. I would really like to have one for downstairs and one for upstairs. And it's a very pleasant project to work on too, and it kind of gives my hands a different activity than knitting, which takes a little bit of pressure off my wrists when I can alternate between the two. Let's talk a little bit about what I've been reading. The first book that I finished after we moved to our new home is The Wild Remedy by Emma Mitchell. This is a beautiful book. It's a memoir, but it also has beautiful little botanical sketches in it. It's really lovely. And this is the secondary title of this book is How Nature Mends Us, a Diary. And this book was really important to me in terms of helping me understand just how much I wanted to move away from the city and move out to the countryside. I started reading it last year, and I found that I actually had to put it down because reading the author's descriptions of all of the nature around her was just, it was almost just too painful for me because I didn't have that, and I didn't have access to that when I was living in a more urban environment. And I was lucky in that there was a park not too far away from me, maybe a 10-minute walk away, but it was very landscaped. You really did not feel like you were anywhere wild, like you were in nature, really. It just felt very manicured, and it was also a very popular spot for kids' birthday parties and barbecues, so it just didn't have that feeling of quiet and privacy that I find so restorative in nature. So I finished this after we moved, and it actually inspired me to start my own nature journal, which maybe I'll share with you sometime. There's so much to write in a nature journal and to sketch where we live now, from flowers to beautiful birds. One of my favorite birds that we see often are orioles. They just have the most incredibly vivid orange breasts, and they are a bird that I don't think I had ever seen in person before we moved here, but they're so beautiful, and they have a very distinctive song. There are 3 or 4 of them that we see either in front of our house or in the field that is just over there. And it makes me so happy if I'm sitting outside reading or knitting or working in our garden, and I hear that song. It's just so lovely to know that those little friends are around. We also have really beautiful blue jays. There's one in particular that has a slightly more violet cast to his feathers, and he's just really gorgeous. I also had sort of a close encounter with a female cardinal, which you may have seen on Instagram. I was walking to the post office and I saw something in the middle of the road, and as I got closer I realized that it was a female cardinal, and her mate, who is, you know, bright red, was sort of swooping around her trying to get her to get out of the street, and she just seemed to be in shock. And I couldn't leave her there, so I went over and picked her up, and one of her wings was a little bit rumpled, so it looked like she'd been in a fight of some sort, but she wasn't visibly injured. I think she was just shocked. So I did a very dramatic sort of stop at the cars that were coming, and I sat with her in my hand, just off the road, at the edge of the forest that's next to our road, for about 10 minutes, and eventually she seemed to calm down and she hopped off my hand and went on her merry way. So that was exciting. I think that's the closest I've ever had a chance to see a bird who wasn't, you know, a parrot or a pet bird, and it was just really wonderful to have that moment of interaction with her. And she was not there when I was on my way back from the post office, so I think she and her mate found their way home, which was a big relief. So that is a long way of saying I highly recommend this book for anyone who loves nature, who misses nature, who deals with mental health struggles, who finds that nature is helpful to them in terms of their mental health. It's really a wonderful book, and I will probably read this again, starting in, I think the way the book is laid out is by month. Yeah, so she starts the book in October, so I think I will probably start reading it again in October and read a chapter per month, so that I'm experiencing the seasons along with the author. The next book that I want to mention is My Kitchen Year by Ruth Reichel. Ruth Reichel was the editor of Gourmet magazine at the time that the magazine folded and went out of print, and she's an amazing writer. This is a memoir about that time in her life and the immediate aftermath, and how she learned to find purpose when the occupation that she thought she would be doing for the rest of her career was suddenly gone. So I am about halfway through this because I decided that I wanted to go back and read her other memoirs, so that I was reading in chronological order. So I did go back and read two of her previous memoirs, Tender at the Bone and Comfort Me with Apples, both of which are excellent. I think Ruth Reichel has a way of looking back at the memories of her younger self and the behavior of her younger years in a way that is both honest and not too harsh. I think it's very easy when we write about our younger selves and things that we perhaps wish we hadn't done, or in retrospect don't know why we did, and to place a lot of judgment on our younger selves. And I really enjoy that Ruth does not place that judgment too harshly. So the two previous memoirs that I've read go from her childhood all the way up through, I think, her 20s and early 30s. So I am going to be reading one more of her memoirs, which is Garlic and Sapphires, before I get back into this book. And I might start this book from the beginning after I finish Garlic and Sapphires. But it's really wonderful. There are beautiful photographs. It's a very appealing layout. You can see little excerpts from her journals and even tweets that she had written at the time. And there are also lots of recipes in here. There are some recipes in her previous memoirs, but to me these are the most appealing recipes. I have two more books to talk about. I've been doing a lot of reading. I really missed reading, and when I was living near New York City, I was spending a lot of time sort of hustling and bustling around, and I did not have a lot of time to read, and I was exhausting myself mentally to the point where even if I had time to read, I really had no inclination to read. I just wanted to do something mindless at the end of the day until I could go to sleep. And it is so wonderful to have both the time and the mental space freed up to be able to enjoy reading more. So there will probably be a little bit less in the way of what I'm watching and a little bit more in the way of what I'm reading as the podcast continues. The next book that I want to talk about is called An Extraordinary Union, which is written by Alyssa Cole. And I read this book because it was recommended by Eva, who is the host of the Charm of It podcast, which I highly recommend. She's been doing sort of a weekly chat format to her podcast lately, which I am really enjoying. So, An Extraordinary Union is a romance novel that takes place in the Civil War era, and it is based on the true story of a woman who was not enslaved but was posing as an enslaved woman in order to gather information for the Union, because she had an eidetic memory and could recall conversations, charts, anything that she saw, and she was able to convey that information. It was a very enjoyable book. It was a good balance between the romance plotline and the plotline of the main character fulfilling her mission as a spy. And she was a very strong character and a very complex character. I've read my share of romance novels over the years, especially as a teenager. Ooh, I read a lot of romance novels as a teenager. I would buy them from the library book sale for like 50 cents. And I thought that my mom had no idea, but I'm sure she knew. Where do you hide like 50 romance novels that your parents will never find them? So hi Mom. Anyway, I've read my share of romance novels, and the characters can be a little bit one-dimensional, but that was not at all the case in this book. The characters were complex, and I also really enjoyed that certain romance novel tropes were not so much at play in this particular book. Specifically the trope of the innocent girl who, has just no idea about anything related to sex. And I always found that very creepy. I don't think that should be the ideal I don't think that should be advertised as what makes a woman irresistible, is her lack of knowledge and her lack of experience. And I mean, that's a rant for another day, but that was not the case in this novel. The main character is not a blushing ingenue, and I found that very refreshing. The last book that I want to mention has quite a long title, so I am going to read that to make sure that I don't miss any of this mouthful of a title. And it is The Art of Showing Up, On Friendship in the Age of Flakiness, How to Show Up for Yourself and Your People. And that is by Rachel Wilkerson Miller. This book came into my life at a time when I really needed to read it, as books so often do. And one of my friends from college used to work with the author at BuzzFeed, and I had read another book by the same author about dot journaling, which essentially it's bullet journaling, but she lays out a lot of different options if you find that the traditional bullet journaling layout is not working for you, but that's a different book. So anyway, this book is really focused on figuring out what it is that you need from friendships, how to convey those needs to others, how to set boundaries with others and with yourself, how to hear what other people need, and how to kind of determine whether a friendship is viable for the long term, and if you even want it to be. There's no reason that friendships cannot be valuable if they aren't long term. There are very valuable short-term friendships as well. And I found it to be a very helpful book, even in terms of the exercises that are in it. They can seem simple, like one of them is just listing out your needs, and I found that very enlightening in terms of, you know, I think there's this pressure to be like the cool girl, the cool friend who doesn't need anything, like just show up whenever, just, you know, and that's not how I operate. And this book was very helpful in terms of helping me acknowledge that, and hopefully helping me to form really positive, mutually enriching friendships in the future. So I do highly recommend that as well. As for what I'm watching, like I said, I have been reading quite a lot, so I haven't been watching a whole lot. I have been watching Star Trek. What is the series called? Let me check. Star Trek Discovery, which I started quite a while ago, but I just couldn't get into it my first watching. But I stuck with it, started over, and I'm really enjoying it. It does require some suspension of disbelief if, like myself, you are very well versed in the Star Trek universe, because there are definitely things that just do not fit with the established canon, but it's a very well done show. The characters are very multidimensional. I'm enjoying it very much. I'm also watching The Innocence Files, which is a series on Netflix that goes into cases covered by the Innocence Project, which, if you have not heard of the Innocence Project, they're an amazing organization that takes a look at cases where people have been convicted potentially wrongfully, and seeks to get new trials or overturned convictions. And Netflix has a collection of episodes out focusing specifically on cases of wrongly convicted Black people, which is such a problem in our justice system. When you watch these episodes and there are people in a position of power, mostly white folks in a position of power, who are so very confident in that they have the right man or the right person who is Black, based on almost nothing, and where it's very clear, even to someone who is obviously not a trained investigator, that this just does not add up. And the willingness to completely overlook that is really horrifying. I wouldn't say it's particularly shocking if you've been paying any amount of attention to the way the U.S. justice system fails Black people and people of color routinely. Particularly if you have any interest in true crime, this will not come as a surprise to you, but to actually see the individuals who are so very sure that they are correct based on nothing really makes it seem so much more real, and it's very unsettling in a way that is important. And I think it's definitely something that especially white folks like myself need to watch, because I think so often there's this feeling of, oh, they were convicted, they were the right person, this person is off the streets. And that's not, that feeling of security and safety from that is not warranted. And I think we need to really take a look at why it is that we're so willing to accept that verdict, particularly when the person who is found guilty is a person of color. So definitely take a look at that. And lastly, I have been watching a mystery called Top of the Lake, which takes place in Australia and stars Elizabeth Moss, who you may know from Mad Men or The Handmaid's Tale. I really like her as an actress. I kind of flaked out on watching Mad Men after a few seasons, and The Handmaid's Tale was a little bit too close to reality for comfort for me, and I stopped watching that as well. But Top of the Lake has given me a chance to really see her as an actress, and she's wonderful at conveying a very multi-dimensional character and in a realistic way. So it is a mystery about a young girl who goes missing, and the dynamics between a very small town and sort of a commune of women who have settled nearby. I don't want to say too much more than that and spoil anything, but it's very, very good. I think there are 2 seasons out right now. I'm watching it on Hulu, but I'm sure it's available elsewhere as well. And I'm definitely looking forward to continuing to watch that. Now for some shop news. I released my summer 2020 colorway collection on this past Sunday, and thank you so much to everyone who has purchased. That just means the world to me, especially this year when so many small businesses, including myself, are taking a big hit because of the pandemic. So thank you very much to everyone for your support. And I want to give you a look at the colors in that collection and just go a little bit more in depth as to what inspired them.
First colorway is called Grapefruit Sorbet. This is a soft, tonal, pale peach inspired by the moments before sunset when the clouds seem to just glow pink from within. This is Elderberry Cordial. This colorway was inspired by the pinkish light at sunset hitting the tree trunks and creating this beautiful brown toned purple berry color. This is Fawn, a beautiful mid-tone brown with peach undertones. This was inspired by a fawn that we saw on one of our walks. It sort of sprang up out of the grass, and I hadn't even known that it was there. And it was just one of the most beautiful sights I've ever seen. Morning Sky. This colorway was inspired by the time just before sunrise when the sky is the most clear, beautiful, pale blue. It's actually referred to as the blue hour in photography. Um, Everyone kind of knows about the golden hour, but the blue hour is sort of the opposite, where the light has this incredible blue tint to it. I wanted to create a very celestial pale blue. Periwinkle is inspired by the flower of the same name. The periwinkle flowers were one of the first to come up around our new home, so they hold a special place in my heart as our first flowers here. The periwinkle colorway is a beautiful, pale, yet very intense blue-violet color. Lastly, we have Dryad. I think trees are such magical ancient beings, and I love the idea of these tree spirits in the fog coming off the river. So I created this slightly silvery olive color. I hope you enjoyed this little tour of my thought process behind the summer 2020 colorway collection. It is so amazing to be living somewhere that is just a fount of constant inspiration, and I'm so looking forward to continuing to share that with you as I interpret all of the beautiful nature around me onto yarn.
Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to sharing more of my knitting, gardening, reading, just my life in general with you next time. Talk to you soon.